We're going to be talking about block set 1, requirement for yellow belt. And now with block set, the biggest thing to remember is depth of action. Once you get an encyclopedia, look up the term depth of action. In other words, it describes the different heights, widths, and depths of any action that we do. In this particular case, our blocks. The main thing that you're going to see is from the front, block set looks almost the same for everybody. In other words, if I pop down in my horse stance here, my upward block, we are going to start by punching up the center line of my body and imagining as though somebody's pressing on my elbow, lifting it up, and we're going to build the roof of a house. We're going, once I punch up, once it hits the top of the house, my elbow is going to flare out as I rotate and present the fleshy part of my fist as the roof of the house. You notice if I were to have two of these up here, this is the roof of the house, and right now here in California it's raining, so hopefully the water would shed off of the top of this roof. The roof line is near the brow, my brow or my eyebrows, and as I return, I come back. Once again, the upward block starts by punching up, not covering the eyes, being able to see over the initial part of the strike. So for instance, let's say someone was coming at me and I wanted to use an upward block to get under it. The reason we stop here with this initial motion is if I am slow in responding to the attack, this might be enough to strike the arm before rotating into the upward block. Once again, once I'm in this horse stance, we punch up the middle of our bodies, stopping before it blocks our vision. Imagining as though someone's pushing your arm up, and as soon as my elbow reaches my face height, I'm going to rotate in and out. Let me show you that from the side view so that you can see the depth of action. Now, predominantly in American Kenpo, people have the same depth of action, the same distance from their bodies for each block. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Mr. Parker never intended for each of the blocks to be at the same depth of action. In fact, the signature in CFAC and in SFAC is the fact that each of our blocks is at a different depth of action from our bodies. From the upward block, in block set 1, punch up. Notice the distance there between my bodies. It almost looks like a vertical. I'm at the vertical outward block position, but it's in the center of my body. I push up and it rotates. You notice here, this is going to be the block that is furthest from my body. Block 1, the upward block, is the furthest from my body. It provides the most margin for error of the upward quadrant blocks. In other words, as I come up from this front view and I turn to the side, look at the distance that is there. This now provides that not only my fist to my elbow now becomes the margin for error. I don't need to be as accurate with this block because I have a greater margin for error than if this block were to just be as I was originally taught 24 years ago, to block above my head. The major problem with this type of block is as can be easily seen, I have no strength. I have disconnected my triceps and my deltoids from supporting of this block, and any force that's going to come down is coming right upon my head, plus with whatever weapon potentially is used, a knife or a club. That is why in American Kenpo I still see this motion that has been passed down from generation to generation, and yet there's no depth of action or margin for error within the block itself. Punch up, up and out. This gives me a margin for error along with that 45-degree angle to move the weapon, whether it's a fist, a knife, a club, a gun, away from my head. Once again, let's take it from the front. Punch up, push up with your finger to build the roof. Same thing now as it returns as in blocking set. They're going to meet in the middle. And you're going to be in this defensive position. Thankfully, my jacket is providing a nice center line for us to see. Here's my center line. One is going to retreat as the other advances. Once again, they meet in the middle. One retreats and one advances. Noticing also, as I'm coming up, the rotation of my fist itself. It's going to not only just come up, but the turning of my fist turns my entire shoulder from being very much inside of my inner rim, or excuse me, my outer rim, my defensive outer rim, as you'll see in book 3. It's now inside my outer rim. Now it's going to be on my elbow, and my fists are on the outer edge of my outer rim. It goes from my eyeballs down to my groin and out to the extremities of my upper body. With that, let's go ahead and turn on to the next blocking set. We aren't going to get through all of it today. Maybe I can do some more video tomorrow. The second one is going to be the hammering inward block. Now, in Mr. Parker's Infinite Insights series, in the section on blocks, he talks about 2 different types of inward blocks. There's hammering inward and there's thrusting inward, which were shown in your video. Execution is a bit different from how I was trained, but we'll talk about that. So in blocking set, we go from upward, and then we see a hammering inward. Noticing that my elbow and my bicep is now attached to my pec. Sometimes I see this big upward and a big downward to where it's all the way here in front of them, rather than stopping at the conceptual box. Once you get your Infinite Insights books, please see the section in, I think it's book 3, where you see Frank Trejo, and there's an image of a box superimposed upon his body. Now, the conceptual box is tailor-fitted to each and every one of us because it's based on our height, our width, our depth, and the length of our arms. My arms are pretty long, and from my conceptual box, if looking at it from the side, the end of the box is here where my hand is folded. That is the end of my conceptual box. So if I were to put both my arms out and hands flipped in, where my wrists are here are the corners of the top of the conceptual box. And that box continues down to where once we go to the traditional downward block, my fist is now at the extreme downward and outward position of the conceptual box, making sure that I do not go beyond the own limitations of my arm and my bodies, unlike we normally see where the blocks either go out here or all the way out here. Once again, with starting this hammering inward block or the thrusting inward block, our goal is to strike the conceptual box corners. They're going to be represented, at least in this demonstration, by my hands. So if looking at it from the side, my personal conceptual box starts with my arms out like a zombie, turning my hands in at the points of the wrist are now the corners of my conceptual box. So for instance, if I go into my horse stance and I start blocking set 1 with just my right arm, upward, here's the hammering inward. Notice elbow is bent, biceps, triceps touching my pec. It leaves a greater margin for error than when we've seen before. Now, something that you might not be exposed to is the fact in short form 1, we see both types of inward blocks being applied, both a hammering inward and a thrusting inward. So for instance, I get done with the salutation, come here to short form 1. The first motion is, as we do it, stepping back naturally. There's hammering inward and then a thrusting inward, both striking the corners of the conceptual box. So taking this from a side motion, or a side view I should say, upward, hammering inward. Now from the front, upward, conceptual box, hammering inward. Now, the depth of action is going to be different from when you're in a horse stance to when you're in a neutral bow. So for instance, if I were to do blocking set in a neutral bow, I'm going to step into I'm in a right neutral bow to you. You can't see my feet, but trust me, they're there. Upward. It looks like now my hand is on the other side of my center line, but that's because of the perspective. My depth of action has changed. In fact, my arm is further out forward in front of me than it was when I was in the horse stance. Let us turn sideways and see if you can tell the difference between doing blocking set in a horse and doing blocking set in a neutral bow. I am now in a horse, side horse to you, upward, hammering inward. Right neutral bow, upward, hammering inward. Look for the depth of action change between those two. That is why personally Clark and I like to do blocking set not from a static horse, but instead in a movable neutral bow, where you go from right neutral bow to left neutral bow, back to right neutral bow for the blocking set. Just for this demonstration, I will show just one of each side, right and left. So for the blocking set in which we show our students, we have them step back into a right neutral bow, upward, hammering inward, extended outward, noticing I'm not going beyond the boundaries of my own body. We call this the lesser deflection block, push down. Now I'm going to step through reverse, upward, hammering inward, extended outward, lesser deflection, push down. In the normal set, the kids or our students would come forward once again, noticing the lesser deflection. That is blocking set 1 according to Clark and I, not the traditional horse blocking set. Now, yes, it is good to practice the traditional American Kenpo blocking set 1 because you're going to need it for blocking set 2 somewhere in brown belt. With that, once again, traditional blocking set is 1, 2, 3, 4, chamber, push down. Other side, up, in, out. I use the lesser deflection, down, chamber, palm heel, up, and then from here starts blocking set 2.